Welcome to the Floral Art Academy podcast, a podcast for floral preservation artists. We're your hosts. My name is Tamsin.
And I'm your other host, Baldus.
And we own Wild Clover Collective, a bouquet preservation company in Queensland, Australia. Today we are talking about the pros and cons of the different methods to dry flowers. Now, I didn't know until we actually got into this business that there's actually a bunch of different ways to dry flowers. Did you know that there was lots of different ways to dry flowers?
No, not really.
No, not really. I didn't really care about it until we got into the business. So let's start with probably the most traditional way of drying flowers. I think everybody knows how to do this, which is air drying.
Well, air drying is the only one that I had heard about before we got into this business.
Right, you just get like a bouquet of flowers and you accidentally forget about it and leave it on the bench and ta-da, dried flowers.
Well, you could also, you tie the base and you hang it upside down. Maybe you hang it up in a heated room.
Yeah.
What did your grandma used to do? Something in Melbourne?
Yes, my grandparents are from Melbourne, and she used to make her own potpourri and she would sell it. And so what she would do, she would like get roses and she would hang them up by the like hot water system or something like that, like the heater or something like that in their house. And because they lived in Melbourne, it wasn't as humid as it is here in Queensland. And so she dried flowers often that way.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So
yeah.
that kind of air drying is the only thing that I'd really heard about beforehand.
Yeah, so pros to air drying is obviously it's easy and it's free and anyone can do it, really. The cons to air drying is you lose the colour, you lose the shape, the flowers sort of shrivel up a bit. They don't sort of have that almost fresh look about them, I guess, that other methods have.
With your quotation fingers that no one can see.
Yeah, my quotation fingers. I do know people who do love that air-dried look, though, and they love that, like, vintagey kind of vibe that air-dried flowers brings about it. I know a lot of our customers probably don't like that look, and I guess a lot of artists don't like that look either, which is why we do the other methods that we do.
Well, it has its place. I mean, shadow frame kind of bouquet preservation, that vintage look goes well with it, I think.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes people do complain about it, but
I think it's a very like traditional kind of old school way, I guess, of doing things.
Yeah, but it can look nice.
Right, it could. Let's move on, shall we?
Yeah.
And speaking of traditional methods of drying flowers, let's talk about the traditional flower press. This is actually something that we still use in our business. We use a traditional wood press that you made yourself. Super clever.
Well, when we started, we were doing pages between a book.
In a book?
And we moved on from that. So let's start with the pages in the book.
Sure.
What was the problem with that? Why did we move on?
The problem was I really was just dumb, and I guess I was using any old book. I didn't really care about what the
Ruined
page.
a few books.
I don't really care about what the pages were made of. So I think back in the day when people used to press flowers in books, that's because it was made from real paper. Whereas nowadays we have so many books that have like
Plasticky pages.
Yeah, plasticky, waxy kind of coating on those pages, and so it has a different result.
I'm pretty sure one of the books we were using was an old artsy craftsy book.
How to make stuff out of flowers. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, so we moved into the wooden, just like the traditional wooden press, and that's really easy to make. Maybe we'll make like a video on YouTube, or if we ever get around to YouTube, of how to make your own flower press, because it's quite easy.
Yeah, well, with the wooden press, you have what are those, wing nuts that you can tighten down, whereas with the book we were also using, I think we were using a Besser block at one point.
It's like a heavy rock.
Yeah.
Which isn't probably the best.
Yeah, no.
We are not, I guess, leading experts on flower pressing either. It's not something that we do a lot of in our business.
But we did do a bunch of trial and error and eventually got to a really good system that's in place.
Yeah.
So with the flower presses that we ended up making, they were quite easy to make. We got all the wood chopped at our local hardware store, so Bunnings.
Shout out to Bunnings! Yeah, so you can just pick up a piece of wood and go over to the
saw section.
The wood cutting section and ask them to cut it for you, and they will, for free.
Yeah, they try to deter people by
It's like the first
adding an
two
extra
cuts are free or something like that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they never charge you.
No.
And so we just get everything to cut to the size that we want, and then come home and drill the corners, throw in the bolts and wing nuts, and Bob's your uncle.
Very easy. If you got a drill, then
Yeah.
you can make a flower press.
Yep.
Yeah, super duper easy. And so the flower presses that we have, there's like 3 planks of wood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
3
So
planks of
two
wood.
layers for the presses.
Yeah, and that works. We have some big ones, we have some small ones as well. So some orders we get are like smaller than our standard order, and so we just use a small press for that, which is good. So let's talk about the pros of the traditional wooden flower press.
I really like the screwing down aspect.
You really like this screwing.
Yeah, because you can stand.
This
on
is
it
a
or something.
G-rated podcast. How dare you?
No, but you can stand on it. You're applying the weight, and then you can screw down on the wing nuts quite easily, and it leaves it as a really tight press, and it's pressed completely vertical. Whereas if you have those other presses that are kind of like those strap ones, I feel like, now I've never used them, but I feel like they would shear the press slightly. And when you're working with someone's really delicate flowers, that might ripple the flowers or bend them or wrinkle them in a way that you don't want. And so having it pressed completely vertical is really nice.
So we use wood panels and acid-free tissue paper to press. I want to make a note here though that we do not press our flowers for any long period of time. So people who are doing traditional pressing methods are leaving those flowers in a press for like 4 to 6 weeks or something like that, and that is the method they're using to dry the flowers out. That is not what we're doing. So if you use wood and acid-free tissue paper and you leave it in there for 6 weeks, do not come
It's
for
going
me.
moldy.
Do not come to me and complain about your flowers going moldy, because
I heard on Floral Art Academy you could leave
Yeah,
it in the press
don't.
for ages. No, that's moldy.
that's not what we do. Yeah, sorry. So I have actually seen in my travels online people talking about pressing between like foam boards.
I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, because apparently they have like holes in the foam, and so air can still circulate around the flowers so that the mold doesn't grow.
So as in the boards themselves are foam, and then you store it like tissue paper in between?
No,
Or-
like maybe the layers. I don't know, but there are people out there using foam I'm not sure. Foam boards so that the air can circulate.
Okay, maybe we
Yeah.
should have researched.
Yeah, maybe we should have. That's not up to me. You can go do your own research, listener. We're just talking about pros and cons. That's the purpose of this podcast. So pros to flower pressing, I would say, is obviously you're getting a nice flat flower. So
Yeah.
for things like coasters, Christmas baubles, ring dishes, jewelry, frames, anything obviously that has like that 2D kind of very shallow look to it, a flower press is obviously going to give you the results that you need.
You can end up with coasters so much nicer.
Yeah.
In terms of it's a coaster that's actually the thickness of a coaster, not the thickness of a block, because you wanted to have a 3D flower in it.
When we first started, I didn't press anything. Like, I dried everything in silica, and then I was also selling coasters and trying to like shove these 3D flowers or petals or whatever into like a shallow piece. Like, it just didn't work. And now that we're like nearly 2 years in, and we have a very good process down pat of what we press and what we don't press, what will press well and what doesn't press well, and sort of being able to determine, yes, if somebody brings us like delphinium, for example, and they have ordered coasters, those delphiniums are getting pressed. They're getting pressed, baby, and they're going in the coasters, and we know that because we've pressed and dried like over 200 bouquets
And
now.
pressed flowers in shallow coasters look so nice. Like the coaster has to be a certain thickness. What looks really good for us is a solid centimetre thickness, but it's so much nicer than the 2 centimetre or 4 centimetre thick coasters that you can buy molds for elsewhere.
I agree. And like I was having a conversation with an artist from the US a while ago now, and she was saying, I don't sell coasters because I hate them, because They don't even look like coasters, first of all. They just look like little circle blocks. Second of all...
because you're making circle blocks coasters.
Second of all, they're not even fit for purpose. Like, your drink's going to slide right off the top of them because, you know, there's no grip on the top. And, she just kept talking about how much she hated them. And so we kind of, like, engineered our molds to the thickness that we wanted, where it's thick enough you can get some nice flowers in there, but it's not so thick that it just looks like a circular block sitting on your table. And I don't know, there's some people that obviously like that vibe, but it wasn't for me.
I don't think the sliding off's an issue, because you could get around that by just not doing a top coat, but like, who wants a lip in their coasters? I'd rather have a pretty coaster.
Personally, I don't care if it's a problem because coasters are one of our best sellers, so as long as the people are buying them, I'm going to be offering them. I don't mind doing them.
We were on pressing.
Pros, you can get things nice and flat. It's a relatively easy and, again, a cheap way of doing it. Like, if you just get yourself some wood, get yourself some wing nuts and some bolts and some washers. Once you buy that, you can use that flower press over and over again. Change out your paper. It's a relatively cheap way of drying flowers. So that's a good one. And, you know, people have been pressing flowers like this for years and years and years and years and years, and there's a reason why people still do it that way.
So if you don't keep your flowers in the press until they're dry, what do? Do you just keep swapping out the paper? Do you take the flowers out and...
Well, you should be checking your paper anyway. So if you're going to keep your press, if you're going to keep your flowers in your press for 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it is, you do need to be changing your paper out. So a lot of people I know will check on their flowers every day for the first 2 to 3 days, and then they'll like swap the paper out as necessary to prevent that mold from happening.
That's so time consuming.
It is very time consuming, and it's why I don't do it.
So what do you do?
I don't have time for that. I'll tell you what I do. So we like to press first. We'll press for maybe 2 days or so, tightening those screws on the second day. Oh my god, words.
Tightening the wing nuts as we
Tightening the wing nuts on, like, you know, whenever you need to, as necessary. Then after about 2 days, we will check on it. If it's good to go, which usually it is by the end of 2 days, we will pop it in silica sand after that.
Yep.
And that removes the remaining moisture out of the flowers.
Easy fix, and you don't have to waste time checking on your flowers every few days.
That is also because we are putting them into molds. So if you are making, for example, like a pressed frame, you might want to continue pressing until they're really, really flat. I don't need my flowers to be really, really, really flat. I just need them to be flatter so that they're fitting into my molds. Another pro to doing it that way is you are able to, I think, retain the color a lot better. If you're just traditionally pressing for 4 to 6 weeks, you might see a lot more color loss that way. But I guess that's one of the cons. So we talked about the pros. It's cheap, it's easy, anyone can do it. You can keep that press and use it over and over again. But the con is you can lose some of that color.
And it is time consuming.
And it is time consuming.
You keep swapping out the paper every day or so that it doesn't get moldy.
Yeah.
The pro is if you have a split system where you press it for a day or so, or a couple days in the press, and then take it out and put it in the silica sand, you get a flat piece that is nice colour.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool, what's next?
Speaking of silica sand, let's move on to that. So silica sand, I think this is probably the most popular way of drying flowers in the floral preservation world, and there's so many tutorials that you can find on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and online. It's what everybody's doing. Let's jump into it. So if you don't know what silica sand is, basically it's a really fine sand that is generally white. I know I've seen sometimes it's kind of like grey or blue-ish in appearance overseas, but here in Australia, the one that we buy is white. And it's just really, really, really fine sand. And it also comes with color changing beads, which are known as silica gel.
Well, I think that's why the other ones appear blue, is because they got crushed color changing gels in them,
Right.
so they appear as either blue or orangey tinge.
Right. So you basically put that in and around your flowers and on top of your flowers, just coat your flowers in that silica sand, and it draws out all of the moisture. So if you've ever bought like a new pair of shoes and there's a little packet that says like do not eat, that's silica gel.
Yep. So imagine that crushed up into a powder.
Yeah. So let's talk about pros of silica sand or silica gel. One of the pros is obviously it retains the natural flower shape and the color very well. So not all flowers are going to dry well, and not all flowers dry the same color that they were when they were fresh, but it does retain color very well.
And some flowers just happen to fall apart more easily when dried in silica sand.
Yes.
Just because it is a weighted object on the flowers. But because it's a weighted object on the flowers, you can also choose whether or not you want to take an old flower, which is very limp, and put it into a press, or maybe you want to press it in the sand itself. And you can open it up, spread it out, and put a heavy load of sand on top, and you will actually get a nice flat flower out of that sand as well, without it getting brown spots from being old and which... Sorry, old flowers in the press tend to get brown more easily. So if you do that flattening of the old flowers in the silica sand, you can avoid that browning.
It won't be as flat as a pressed flower,
No.
but it will be pretty, like it'll be pretty flat.
But if your mold that you're putting the flower into, for instance, is a centimetre thick, it'll do the job.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump into the cons of silica sand. So, number one con is it can be dangerous to work with. If you have not listened to our other episode about wearing PPE while drying flowers with silica sand, go and listen to it right now. Really important that you're protecting your lungs. So, I've been having this conversation online with a few artists recently this week, which is why I'm just fresh in my mind while I'm thinking about it. It's really important that we're wearing PPE when we're working with silica sand. And what I mean by PPE is a proper mask with particle filters. So your organic vapor mask is not good enough because silica sand is not a vapor. It's not a gas. It's teeny tiny little pieces of sand that are going up into the air and then being trapped inside your lungs. And I don't want to scare anyone, but I kind of do.
Yep.
I kind of do want to scare
wear
you.
PPE and listen to that previous podcast.
Yeah, go listen to the podcast about that. So that is a con. That you have to wear PPE, which means you have to like invest some money. And speaking of money, silica sand is not cheap.
No, so that's
It's
another con.
expensive. Yeah.
And then one other con is it gets spent. So by that I mean you need to recharge it after a few uses.
I think everyone also thinks that like silica sand is infinitely rechargeable, and it's not. It will come a time where
Yeah, I don't know. I'm torn about this one because we've talked to some artists, and so online silica sand, you Google it and it says you can recharge it 1,000 times before it no longer
counting
recharges.
1,000 times?
I don't know. That's just Google's. It can
I'm
be
not
recharged a
counting
lot
that.
of times, but we've talked to some artists and they see that it no longer absorbs moisture from flowers after about 4 uses. And so then I went and talked to our supplier for silica sand, and he was saying that he's known some people that have had the same packets of silica sand for 30 years and they still recharge nicely. And so he is of the belief that people are just recharging at too high of a temperature.
Oh.
And so when you recharge at too high of a temperature, your indicator beads tend to burn out. And it might not be that the silica sand itself is burning out, but rather the indicator beads are burning out.
Also, you don't know whether...
I don't know whether or not it's the beads that are burning out, whether it's the sand that's burning out, or whether it's just the people are recharging it at too high a temperature. Because when you Google it, it's like 170 degrees it should be recharged, or 160, but there's like a fine line between that temperature and when it's too hot. Whereas that distributor was saying actually you should be recharging it as close as you can to 100 degrees. It takes a lot longer to recharge, but it's a lot safer for the silica sand to not burn out.
I can see how tempting it would be to like chuck it on a really high temperature to like get it done faster.
Yeah, no. So we used to recharge around like 150 degrees. It was burning
Celsius?
things. Yeah, Celsius.
Celsius.
Sorry. But now I'm doing maybe 115 degrees, and it seems to be a bit nicer. It takes about, I don't know, 5-6 hours for a thin tray recharge. But no, it seems to be doing well. But we also haven't gone past, because we have so much silica sand, we haven't gone past a few recharges per lot yet. So we're still, even though we're 2 years in, we're still undecided on that particular topic.
Okay, so let's recap. Silica sand, pros. Keeps flower shape, keeps flower colour, easy to find, very popular method of drying flowers. And I would say a relatively reliable method of drying flowers.
Yeah,
I can
that's a good one.
I can almost always, I wouldn't say guarantee, but I can almost always predict what something is going to look like coming out of sand.
Yep. If a flower falls apart and it doesn't work well, that flower was always going to fall apart. There's some other methods where it may not, but like for the most part, certain flowers are more fragile and will fall apart.
For sure. Chrysanthemums, I'm talking to you. Chrysanthemums. Oh my goodness. All right.
Dahlias are on the edge. Like you can
edge.
freeze dry them and they'll survive, but silica sand, they're more iffy whether they'll survive in silica sand. But for the most part, silica sand is very reliable.
Cons are obviously it can be dangerous to work with. You need PPE. It can be expensive for sure. I know for us it's expensive. You do need to recharge it, but I guess that's in itself a pro as well. Is that it's rechargeable. Yeah. Like it's a pro and a con at the same time. And any other cons that you can think of? Oh, one that I thought of was you were talking about damaged flowers. You do need to have a bit of a gentle hand when you're working with silica sand. So it's not quite as simple as like dumping sand onto a flower. And again, when you're taking the flowers out of sand, you've got to be quite gentle with that process. You can't just like yeet the sand out of the bucket.
Yeah, it is a bit time consuming to dry the flowers in terms of putting the flowers into the sand and taking the flowers out of the sand. Like you're not digging the flowers out when you want to take them out. That'll just rip the petals off. You're wanting to use a shallow dish and tip it out slowly as if it's sand through an hourglass where it just flows away from the petals nicely.
These are the days of our lives.
And the flowers just reappear. Like,
I've seen people like Sherry Vegas, for example, use like a piece of tulle and she pours the silica sand, she lifts up the tulle afterwards, but like who's got the time? Who's got the time? I don't got the time to do that, unfortunately. When you're drying like 100 bouquets, 150 bouquets a year or whatever, what have you, like I just don't have the time to be like layering down pieces of tulle.
Next one.
Let's talk about freeze drying. Let's talk about personal and professional failure on your behalf.
On my behalf. So when people say freeze-dried flowers, I'm putting a quotation mark, finger quotation marks here, they're talking about professional freeze-dry fryers, which are like 50 grand a pop and take 2 weeks to freeze-dry a flower. Which are programmed in and they heat up slowly. Do
you want to tell the people what kind of freeze dryer you bought for Wild Clover Collective?
I bought a food freeze dryer.
Right. Which, did you do a lot of research on it?
I did a little research on it.
That means basically none.
No, but a professional freeze dryer also uses chemicals. They pre-dip their flowers in something. I haven't researched that
I assume
yet,
they use chemicals.
Yeah, of course they use chemicals. And depending on what type of flower it is, they use different chemicals. So if it's a white or white or peach kind of, they use one. If it's a colourful one, they use a different kind of pre-chemical.
I didn't know
there's
that.
a few different types. We don't use any chemicals because I don't know why. And we use a food freeze dryer, which freeze dries over, say, 2 days instead of 2 weeks. Now, because we're rushing the procedure, as the water evaporates from the inside of flowers, sometimes we get puffing of the petals.
Yeah, the petals go puffy and weird. And I've shared this on our Instagram stories a few times. Like, our customers will have seen this before. And when we, like, started doing the freeze dryer, everyone got, like, really excited because they were like, oh, you know, you're going to start freeze drying our flowers. And I think a few customers thought that it was going to be a better method than the methods that we use now, which is silica sand. And I've had to say to the customers, like, actually, no, we're not going to be freeze drying your flowers because I cannot guarantee how they're going to come out. Some flowers come out great. For example, you said dahlias earlier.
Yeah, dahlias in a freeze dryer, so much better than dahlias in silica sand. Dahlias in silica sand will fall apart, I don't know, 50% of the time. In freeze dryer, there are certain varieties of dahlias, because you got like the pom-pom varieties, the big plate varieties. Certain varieties,
dinner plate dahlias.
In certain varieties in the freeze dryer, they come out perfect. Like, you can't get that kind of quality in silica sand.
On the other hand, roses do quite well.
Yep.
In the freeze dryer as well.
Especially old roses.
On the other hand, things like stock and snapdragon do terribly in the freeze dryer. We have no luck.
Certain flowers puff, certain flowers don't dry nicely because there's so much moisture in them. But one of the other pros to a freeze dryer is if you hit a flower with the freeze dryer to start out with and then just lay it on top of a silica sand box, as in like the silica sand in a box and it's airtight, and you just lay the flowers on top of the silica sand, it doesn't shrivel as it would normally. It keeps its structure, which and color. So it's a weird kind of combo where, like, you could throw it in the freeze dryer and then throw it on top and not having to bury it. And some of those more delicate flowers also survive and look quite nice.
We also don't know like from brand to brand how things would do. So I know that the Vintage Flower Box, who's also in Brisbane, she uses a freeze dryer for her work, and her flowers are great. Like, her work is great. And so, but I know that she has something different to us because I've seen her stories before, and the racks look different, like the equipment looks different to ours, and so I'm always like, I wonder what kind of freeze dryer she has.
The old roses that we've used in the freeze dryer, they come out so nice.
Yes. So we grow our own roses here on our property, and so we just, use our own roses from time to time to test things out. And we found that the older the flower, or the older the roses, the better it comes out in the freeze dryer.
Yeah. So if you had an old rose and you wanted to press it, it would get those brown spots in a flower press. But you could flatten it in silica sand, or even nicer, you could put it in a freeze dryer and it comes out nice and crispy, nice and flat surface, depending on if you put it face down or face up, and it could just go straight into a frame at that point.
Freeze drying pro, you don't have to deal with silicosis.
Yep. Freeze drying con, some flowers don't dry for a food freeze dryer in the 2-day cycle or 1-day cycle, and so they need to be placed into an airtight box with silica sand to keep drying.
Freeze drying pro, once you turn the freeze dryer on and you lock the door and stuff, you can just walk away. Like, you don't have to check on it the next day. You don't have to change the paper. You don't have to do anything like that. It's just you beep, press the button, and it stops when it stops.
Another freeze drying pro, people who love dahlias and give you dahlias in wedding bouquets can actually have dahlias in their finished pieces because they're not all just petals.
Yeah, but people dry dahlias with silica.
Yeah, I know, but we've done
and
that
they
as
glue
well,
them back together.
Oh god,
I'm not doing that.
Who's charging for that hourly
No
rate?
one. No one's charging.
You're a business.
Charge more, everyone. Freeze drying cons, very expensive. So our machine cost $10,000. Was it worth it? Probably not. But it's a fun experiment.
Freeze drying pro, you can have a doomsday prepper kind of.
Freeze drying pro, you can also freeze dry things like strawberries. So another con would be that, for me at least, is that it's unreliable. I can't predict how something is going to come out of the freeze dryer, and for us that means we're doing a combination of freeze dryer and silica sand anyway, and it just feels kind of like, well, I have to get silica sand out anyway, I might as well just do it in silica sand, at least
And
for us and our setup.
it took a little bit of time or a few cycles to get the drying temperature right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's a 2-day limit on the freeze dryer that we bought because of the pump. It gets too hot, and so our drying temperature is limited to a particular temperature, which means that it's hit and miss in terms of sometimes you just get puffy petals.
Another con is like it's kind of big. It's like the size of a dryer, like a washing machine or a dryer. So you need to be able to find somewhere to put that. You need somewhere to put like the pump and the hoses and stuff. And so it's not the most space efficient way of drying flowers.
No, it was a very expensive
It was. Now, fun. Last one that I want to talk about is drying flowers in the microwave. I've never done this.
What do you use for a microwave?
So there's this thing called the microfleur, which is like a flower press. It is a flower press, but it's made to go in the microwave. And basically the idea behind it is that you zap out all the moisture in the microwave. You're essentially cooking your flowers and you're pressing them at the same time.
Okay, so because they're pressed at the same time, you don't get the puffiness as the water inside the petals evaporate.
I guess so.
And how does it keep the colour? Is it good?
I've seen people have really good results with the microfleur, and I've also seen people have hideous results with the microfleur. And I'd love to try it myself one day and see what happens.
So without trying it, it kind of sounds like it's hit and miss, or maybe use it.
I think it would be hit and miss because everyone has different microwaves. Everyone has different wattage. Everyone, you would have to test, I think, to see what the appropriate amount of time is before you just outright, burn your flowers.
You also wouldn't do large scale with a microfleur.
No.
So you wouldn't be able to run a business with that.
No way. It's not a sustainable method for someone who's wanting to press a whole bouquet.
And I
imagine standing in your kitchen meh, every 30 seconds, doing
if
one. If
you're running a business, you got 10 microwaves, 10 microfleurs.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound feasible.
So pro, I think it would be fun.
Yeah,
to see what flowers. Another pro is that it's fast. So because you're cooking and pressing, you can essentially dry your flowers pretty quickly. I wouldn't be putting them in resin straight away though, unless you want
maybe some silica sand as well.
Perhaps
combine it with silica sand.
Perhaps. So the con there is obviously it's not sustainable on a large scale. If you want to do a whole bouquet, I think it's expensive for what it is. I don't know how much it is, but I've got this figure in my head that it's around $70. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll MacGyver a homemade one and try it.
What is it, ceramic or something?
I think it's felt.
Felt in a microwave? That doesn't sound right.
No, don't ask me. I didn't research for this podcast episode. Anyway, look it up. You look it up in your own time.
Sure.
Okay, so let's do a really, really quick recap of everything that we talked about. So, air drying pros. It's quick. It's easy. Anyone can do it. It's free. You really don't need to do anything special for it. Cons, you're going to get that old, shriveled kind of look with your flowers. You're going to lose the colour. You're going to lose the shape.
Yep, but we have still put some bouquets have been given to us as air dried, put into resin, and they've come out really nice.
Yeah.
So it's a vintage look, but you can use a vintage look in a new medium, and it still comes out beautiful.
Yeah, because it's about the memories.
Yeah.
For some people, they don't need it to look like the fresh bouquet. It's just what the flowers represent to them. That's the important part. All right, traditional press pros.
Cheap.
Easy, relatively easy. Anyone can learn how to do it. It's a very traditional method that's been used for ages. You can get those flat flowers for shallow pieces and frames and the like. Cons.
If you don't check on it, it goes moldy. So
Moldy.
it's time consuming.
Time consuming, and also you can lose some of that color
Yep.
as well.
But if
and you can get some bruising as well
Yeah,
on those
yep.
petals. All right, silica sand pros.
It keeps the color, keeps the texture, keeps the shape.
Yeah. Anything else?
And you can press with it as well if you use it appropriately.
It's very effective and relatively reliable.
Yep. That's the main one. It's the most reliable way of drying flowers.
Cons.
Hazard for your health if you don't wear appropriate PPE. It's costly for large amounts, and
And it's time consuming as well.
Yeah, it's time consuming.
Floral preservation is time consuming, just like on the whole. Let's
Yep.
be real. All right, next one, freeze drying pros. You've got that color retention. For some flowers, like dahlias, for example, you get that shape retention. There's no breakages happening there.
Yeah, so those dahlias are the biggest pro to
love
freeze dry. Yeah, because with silica sand, the dahlias fall apart for the most
Yeah.
part. With the freeze dryer, they come out so beautiful.
It's really interesting.
You can also salvage older flowers with a freeze dryer,
Yeah.
especially roses.
Yeah. Cons, expensive,
Yep. Sometimes it's still hit and miss with the puffy petals.
especially if you buy a food freeze dryer.
Yep.
And yeah, just kind of, very expensive and not very user friendly, I would say. There's a lot of testing that has to be done to get that just right, those settings right for drying flowers. And we haven't even gotten them really right.
No, that's because we're limited by the pump. Anyway, microfleurs.
Microfleur Pro, it's quick, it's fun, it's easy. But cons, I would say, for what it is, it's expensive. It's hit and miss again, and you might just cook your flowers.
Yeah, not really.
And not
business.
not sustainable for a business.
Yeah, well, I think that's it for drying flowers.
Do we miss any? If we've missed any of your favorite methods of drying flowers, please let us know. They can comment here on Spotify, or
Is that a thing? Can you comment on Spotify?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can. You can rate.
Okay, where else
Yeah.
would they send their comment?
They can come over to the Instagram, Floral Art Academy Instagram, and send me an angry DM about how I didn't get their favorite method of drying flowers.
And or TikTok.
And or TikTok. TikTok's probably our favorite, and I think that's really evident.
Oh,
'cause
there's
we
YouTube
post
as
it.
well, but we're hardly
No, there's
there.
not.
Well, we've posted some things.
Have we? Oh, we posted shorts.
Yeah.
Go watch the shorts.
We have a YouTube. But really, it's just recycled TikToks. Sounds good. Hopefully you learnt something. If not, it was a good chat. Bye.
Bye.